Hey guys, this is gonna be a very big video touching so many different topics, but it's all about regionals in Houston with the top 8 deck list, with the controversies, with everything that is it here. So let's just jump in. The table of contents for this video will be as follows. All of this will be in chapters, so you can jump around if you want to hear about a specific topic. First, we have attendance breakdown, overall metagame breakdown, conversion rates for day 2, cheapest decks for day 2, because I know people want to hear about that. Then we have the metal foil cards, which are the prizes. Are they affecting the metagame? Then we have Metashifts, and why was China different than North America? And I have an opinion about that. Next topic is gonna be how single Elim ruined kind of day 2, and then we're gonna have the top deck lists for top 8 analysis, and at the end a short note on the controversy, which includes Alan and a location. All right, let's go. Let's start talking about the event. It was over 1,100 people playing the first ever regional in the USA. Now, I hope that Bologna will be even bigger. I hope there was gonna be like 2K people, but it's actually crazy numbers for a first ever event like that. So I'm very happy to see the attendance. Now, we're gonna be using few websites. I'm gonna be always calling it out. Eggman Events here has a really nice visual breakdown of the attendance over here, but without unfortunately all the stats. So we're gonna be jumping between two websites. But you can see that on the left it's top 64, on the right it's the entire breakdown of the attendance, and as you can see visually there is a big discrepancy, but it's not big as you might think. Riftmana assembled some nice stats that were posted by the Riftbound official account, so we're going to take a look at that. This is the one missed meta distribution. As you can see, Kai'Sa is in the first place with 33% and 372 people playing Kai'Sa. Now I wanted to speak a little bit about the 33%. Now I think that because it's a first expansion of the card game, and also because it have been seen in China that the deck is very powerful, it's not surprising that the deck is popular. Every card game has a popular deck. That is normal. Every card game has the most popular deck that is perceived as being the best, and most people flock to it. That is very standard, and I think 33% is actually not that much. Now the problem is when we're going to talk about other stuff like the conversion rate and the effect of the metal foil cards a little bit later down in the video, but I think this is pretty healthy metagame that we can see here in day 1 attendance, where 33% is Kai'Sa. For example, when in Star Wars Unlimited Boba Fett was getting banned, he had over 40% of attendance, but also his conversion rates were pretty high. Overall his power level was also pretty busted. But anyway, the point is, I think 33% for day 1 is pretty healthy. I am honestly a little bit surprised by the lack of more sets. Only 5% of people started playing set, but maybe they anticipated the rise of the dazzling Aurora decks, which is very, I would say, a nice meta call, because I think there was like this circle where everyone expects Kai'Sa to be the most popular deck, which is always correct. But then Annie and Teemo should be on the rise, because most people that are playing the game and are testing it a lot realize that Annie is incredibly powerful, and Teemo is, let's say, a specialist deck. Has potential, but you have to put the hours into it. I was thinking that Annie is going to be much more popular than 11%. That will be reaching actually like 15, maybe even around 20. But I might be an aspect of it not being that easily accessible because of the proving ground situations. And I think that might have affected the pick rate as well a little bit. At the same time, I do think that people maybe didn't realize that much that Annie is actually incredibly strong, because in similar colors, like you essentially play red, you're probably going to play Kai'Sa, right? But Annie is a similar approach to the game, but more on units based, and it's faster than Kai'Sa, even though on like for someone who is not really well versed in Riftbound, they might look similar on the first like you know, at the first glance. Now, because Kai'Sa and Annie could be like a front runner of the metagame, but also alongside Seth, for example, who was getting a very big uptick in the previous metagames in like the 10K that was being played before, which was being won by Seth, I feel like people started preparing for a lot of quote-unquote aggro matchups, because, you know, this game doesn't really have the particular kind of aggro decks that are found in other games like Magic the Gathering, Star Wars Unlimited, or even Flesh and Blood. So the game works just a little bit differently because of the score point system. But anyway, because of that, I feel like there was a potential rise against the aggro decks of choices in the sideboards and so on, because people anticipated that the Dazzling Auroras are gonna be less played. But that made the Aurora players actually rise up in numbers because they anticipated that and played the anti-meta game, which I think is pretty cool. This happens in every card game, but I definitely didn't suspect that so many people will be playing Dazzling Aurora decks, although there is one of the Master Yi's in the top 8 that didn't have them in main deck but had them in the sideboard and it was swapping between them. I'm going to talk about that later in the top 8 as well. Overall, I think this is pretty balanced though, as it day one attendance is pretty sweet. Like this, every single character was being played. Obviously, we're gonna talk about that in a second, but overall the numbers are not worrying in my opinion. Now let's talk about the conversion rate for day 2, because I think this is one of the best stats when it comes to assessing like power levels of both decks and players combined, because it shows to you if the deck overperformed or underperformed. So on this graphic over here, we're going to be looking at the second row, the percentage of meta day 1 and day 2. For example, over here we have Kai'Sa, who had 33% of the attendance in day 1, but now in day 2 has 42%, which means that she rose in popularity because many people converted their numbers, right? So Kai'Sa overperformed as a deck, even though it was the most the most common deck in day 1. More of them qualified than statistically they should, right? So the deck overperforms, which I feel like is straight up in line with how Kai'Sa plays. People perceive the deck as powerful, but also it's a deck which can be played incorrectly and then it's very underwhelming. So I feel like the players who actually know how to play the deck are gonna overperform because of that. And there were many good players that are choosing to play Kai'Sa, so they overperformed overall. And many other players who are just like riding the wave of popularity fell down, but still the deck prevailed because the deck is pretty good. Now, when it comes to Master Yi, he kept almost his numbers from 15% to 17%. The rise of popularity of Master Yi when it comes to the Aurora build is because it's pretty decent against Kai'Sa, right? The mid-range versions are perceived as a little bit less favored into Kai'Sa, while the Aurora are pretty, they're pretty liked in that matchup. So it's not like out of the ordinary that they have 17%. And then because, most likely they were paired against Kai'Sas. And then we have Annie, who is performing very well. From 11% to 17%, putting up an incredible numbers. And I know that we're going to talk about the top 8 with 4 players being Annie, but the top 8 has to be a conversation about the format of day 2, so that's gonna be in a little bit later. Now we're just talking about the conversion rate that goes into day 2, right? So overperforming by Annie, I think the deck is incredibly powerful, but also favors you when you're practiced, and I feel like it's one of those decks that is very easy to fuck up, so even more than Kai'Sa, I would say, but it's very fun to play. So I'm not surprised that it's overperforming here, but I, as I said in the previous segment, I was thinking there's gonna be more Annies, but again, maybe proving grounds, making it difficult for her to be more popular. Miss Fortune, now that's for me a little bit of a surprise. I like the combination of Dazzling Aurora with the purple color because it allows you to be a little bit more disruptive, right? Specifically because you play Mind Splitters, which are fantastic creatures to get out of Dazzling Aurora because they attack directly your opponent's hand, which is phenomenal. Not only get the informations, but you can deny like a powerful turn in the it's just very proactive. So I really like the purple build of Miss Fortune, even though I'm not a fan of Aurora builds because the deck revolves so much against around one way of playing the game, right? So I'm surprised by the numbers, but I'm even more surprised by the amount of people who converted. So it seems like Miss Fortune is just having a great time against this field. And probably, now I'm not an expert, maybe you guys in the comment can tell me, but I feel like Miss Fortune should be favored against other Master Yis when it comes to like Aurora matchups, but maybe I'm wrong about that. But I feel like it could be it, right? You have access to the Mind Splitters to remove very specific and problematic cards. Both of them have access to Sabotage, but in general, like the purple one has more tools to deal with the hand, right? Then Teemo underperformed a little bit from 6% to 5%. And I think that's on rate because the deck has very high lows. Sorry, very low lows and very high highs. It's a very specialized deck. People who know how to play this and pilot this character are gonna be overperforming heavily, but they also can be shut down by RNG. I feel like the deck, again, I'm not an expert, but I will gonna put some hours into Teemo. I feel like the deck can sometimes just break, and then even if you're a great player, you might just not win because of that. And Teemo seems like might be this conversion might be showing this. Victor is a very popular deck even at locals here in Poland. It just seems like people like playing him, but he's definitely underperforming, and I feel like he just doesn't have a great place in the metagame, even though there were so many Aurora decks. But again, Victor needs to be built around playing against Aurora a little bit as well. This when you have to target Kai'Sa in the first place, and probably Annie if you're like well versed in the game. I don't know if Victor can be actually can be built in both of those directions at the same time. Yasuo, well, was 2%, his 2%. So that's great. And Darius was 2% and goes 2%. Now, this is just statistics. I feel like, you know, that's cool. That's cool that someone made it. Now, there was also one Lee Sin and one Volibear in the top 64, which is great. But the big losers here, there are two big losers that are missing in the top conversion rate to day 2, and that is Set and that is Ahri. Now, I can talk a little bit about Set because I was eyeing to play Set myself, and I think it's a great deck when it comes to like the flavor of it. In theory, the power is also pretty decent of it, but I think there's one problem. I think that the Set's power lies in the inability of the opponent of playing against you. So what I mean by that is that if your opponent doesn't know your game plan or doesn't have experience against Set, you're gonna just steamroll those people because you just like the ability to just recall your units is so powerful when your opponent doesn't have like the awareness of how to deal with those creatures 2 times, right? Or like even try to force it to be removed and kill them in the base after they get recalled. Not every deck also has that even possibility, but I feel like it's Set relies on people not knowing how to play against them rather than Set knowing how to play the matchup against other people. And I think that combination with the fact there's also a Aurora increase in the regionals made the Sets fumble hard. And I also think that in general Set is just not an easy deck to pilot, even though that his low, like his floor, is actually pretty high, so you will decently play even when you don't know how to play the deck very well. But if you don't know how to pilot it really well or like almost perfectly, which is impossible in this game by the way, then you're not gonna perform with this deck at all. Like the sky is very high, but it requires you to play literally almost perfect. Now when it comes to Ahri, I literally never played Ahri, so I don't have like a full first-person perspective, but from my experience playing against Ahris and seeing how they play, I would say the deck is incredibly hard to play, and it's just also one of those decks that will be eating your brain. There's so many decisions that you have to do, and you have to be proactive and reactive at the same time with those decks, and I feel like they're just hard to pilot. And when you take those decks at a very big event, you're setting up yourself to fail. And also, I feel like the metagame just didn't favor her. Both Kai'Sa and Annie should be very well positioned against Ahris, and those were very popular decks, right? So when you're facing like 44% of the entire population being pretty good against you, that is a problem. Now let's talk about the cheapest decks that actually got to day 2. Now, the one Yasuo that got into the top 64 is actually worth $78. This is prices on TCG Player, so this deck is gonna be even cheaper in Europe. For some reason, there's just a big discrepancy when it comes to the costs of the cards. Typically, we have like around 10 to 20% cards cheaper in Poland. In Europe, but also sometimes even more than that. So the TCG Player is a little bit more volatile, but I think because a lot of you are actually watching from America, I'm gonna be addressing the TCG player first and foremost. I have like 40% of you guys coming in from the demography of North America. So Yasuo is $78 worth, and most of its value is actually, this is kind of hilarious when you think about it, but the $24 are in an uncommon, which is the stack deck. It's hilarious. Like, the only rare that is worth more here is Zonya, right? When the deck has 2 Zonyas, which is $26, but then you have $24 in 3 uncommons, and the deck in its entirety is worth $78. While you like, it's kind of crazy. So this is a very cheap deck that got this player to the top 64, and also got him the metal foil card for Yasuo, which is amazing, and it's just cool to see. And the second deck that got to the highest day 2 by being also the cheapest is one of the Teemo decks. So this one is being piloted by Migan, who was 55th, and his deck is worth $156, where its majority of the cost is actually the 2,000 Tailed Watchers, which is one in the main deck and one is in the sideboard, and that is $82 alone. So half of the deck is in 2 cards. Other than that, again, you have a stacked deck uncommon, which is 3 times in the deck, and that's $24. And other than that, you just have like some Mundos, which are $5. The Mind Splitters are pretty playable, but also only in like 2 purple decks, which are also not very popular, so they're not super expensive. So yeah, if you're looking to get into Riftbound right now with cheap decks, Yasuo and Teemo are definitely the choice, and those could be a good starting point when it comes to like playing the game, but only from like the economical standpoint, because I feel like Teemo is not the best choice for your first deck unless you're very versed in card games overall, while Yasuo is a little bit more classic. So yeah, Yasuo could be a good choice. Now let's talk about a very, very interesting topic. Every regional will have this unique prize, which is a metal foil card for each legend that we have currently in the game for the best performer of that legend. You don't even need to get into day 2. You will just have to be the best performer of this legend to actually get this metal foil card. Now, I was expecting them to be very expensive, but I didn't expect them to be that expensive. If I'm trusting the rumors that I hear, and I trust the people that I have those rumors from, those are worth up to $100,000, which is incredible. And if you have them, sell them already right now. Like, they're gonna go most likely lower in value when more regionals are gonna be played over time, because, you know, there's gonna be more Kaisers, there's gonna be more Master Yi's, and so on. And they should probably be exactly the same. We're just gonna get new legends from the other newer expansions, so there's gonna be more options to win those cards, but the amount of collectors that we have in the game are probably gonna be, you know, like not really rising that much. So there's gonna be a limited amount of space of people who would like to buy those cards in the future. Anyway, I digress. But I wanted to speak about how does this potential prize affect the game, because it does actually affect the game. Many games tried balancing like the you know, how to motivate people to play the less popular characters or maybe the less powerful, and I think money, it might be the best choice. So but it's also just such a cool prize. I think it's really cool. I just wanted to say Star Wars Unlimited tried doing something very similar. We also have showcase cards in Star Wars Unlimited, which are basically like foil alt art versions of the legend equivalent of the leader cards that you have in Star Wars Unlimited, and you get them the same way for the best performers, right, in Star Wars Unlimited, but only if you get to day 2, and those showcases are not unique for the event. They're just like exactly the same like the ones that you can get from the box. So there's no incentive as much. I mean, when you compare it, it's actually non-incentive because those are unique promos. So now let's go back to the attendance and think about a little bit, because this is going to be assumptions. This is not real facts, right? This is going to be my assumptions about how those metal foil cards pricing could, in theory, affect the game's metagame on day 1. And well, you know what? I can make an assumption, but I can definitely tell you that there will be no one playing Garen in this game if there would be no prize like this. Because one of those Garens, which is 1 out of 13 people, is getting a card that is worth probably minimum worth like $10,000. That's like 8% to win $10,000. I take that die roll every time. This is actually pretty sick. So those people got motivated to play, to choose Garen, the worst character in the game, at least for now, to play in a regional event with over 1,000 people. It's still a very small drop, but I think Garen would have not been chosen at all. Volibear is also not really popular because again, like not really powerful character, right? But one got to top 64, by the way, with a very, very impressive score of 7 wins and 1 loss. Now, because of that, we probably have, I would assume that characters like Jinx, Darius, Lux, Lee Sin, Volibear, and Garen, so 6 legends, were being overpicked by a large margin just because of the metal foil prizes. Those people probably would be playing different decks in more popular decks if that prize would not be here, right? So I feel like we have to think about that, but I don't think that's bad for the game. I think it's fantastic that we have not only a way of supporting the players financially by not giving them just cash, but also motivating people to a little bit get out of the comfort zone and play something else. I think this is great, right? But we have to talk about it because it's 100% affecting the metagame. That's like around 140 players, which is 10% of people playing the entire tournament, choosing something just because of the price. Because I would have to assume that from those people who played those 6 legends that I mentioned, most of them, like 80 to 90% of them, would not be playing that legend. I would fully expect like 2 people play Volibear, 2 people play Lee Sin, 2 people play Lux, 2 people play Darius, 0 people play Garen, you know? Next topic of conversation will be the Chinese metagame and how different it was from the European and American one. And I feel like, again, this is gonna be a little bit of my own opinion. This is not gonna be based on super duper thorough checked stats and facts, okay? It's gonna be my impression from other games as well and overall like musings. But overall, the Chinese metagame did find Kai'Sa and Yi, of course, being incredibly powerful. And that is correct. We all know that those 2 decks are incredibly powerful. But other than that, they kinda lacked the evolution of the metagame to find answers for those 2 decks. So the most popular decks over course of the Origins playtime in China kind of stayed the same. We had Kai'Sa, we had Yi, and then we had Misfortune, Victor, Teemo essentially were the biggest players in the metagame in China. Also, Ahri and Yasuo were trying to be performing in a little bit in China. Maybe I'm not actually Yasuo, but Ahri a little bit more. But they get very fast fact-checked and were not performing after that. But the biggest 2 things that I think was not being evolved in China at all was the Set decks and the Annie decks. Obviously, right now, we can definitely say that right now, right? But during the early metagame in North America and Europe, many people were talking about Annie potentially being incredibly good, and people were brewing those decks and refining them up to the Houston regionals when that theory got proven correct. Now, why does the Chinese metagame didn't move forward while playing the game in its first iteration? We have seen similar aspects of this in other card games as well. Like, for example, One Piece had an advantage of being released in the Eastern countries earlier than in North America and Europe, and there were similar stories where the European and American metagame actually evolved in a different direction than the Chinese or Japanese scene when it comes to the metagame in their own countries. Now, this again repeats itself in Riftbound, and I have to say that my opinion, I think this comes from cultural background where in Europe and America, there's a big history of playing card games. The first trading card game coming from America, and I personally play since the 90s in many different card games, and we had so many different card games over the years where there's always like this niche of people who enjoy playing them but also brewing with them. So I feel like the European and North American markets are way more flexible when it comes to approaching card games because of that, and at a base level they have better fundamentals. Some of you probably know that I was professionally involved in the Valorant scene when I was an analyst for the official broadcast, but also creating content for it. And one of my observations when it comes to the Eastern regions, but specifically China, was that they are very mechanically gifted. Like, they have fantastic aim, but they lack in 2 other very important departments when it comes to the tactical FPS genre, which Valorant is. This is basically Counter-Strike with abilities, right? Not Overwatch, don't confuse it. This is Counter-Strike. So it's more about tactics, it's more about fundamental knowledge, how to play macro on the map, good positions, trading, crossfire, and like communications that are on top tier level. Now, the Chinese region doesn't have great history when it comes to tactical FPS games, which are coming, again, from America. And America and Europe are proven over time that are the best regions when it comes to Counter-Strike and also overall in Valorant, although I know there's one Chinese world champion, but I digress. Anyway, point is, China didn't have the experience when it comes to the genre itself, and they were mechanically good when it comes to aiming, but were not good at both fundamental level of tactical FPS gameplay, which is trading, spacing, macro overall, but are also not really great at theory crafting, what Valorant is good about when it comes to the agents being played, utility, so the skills, the spells, as to say, should have been used in this game. So they were behind the metagame, and they were, because of that, not performing as well as a team unless the star players were literally fragging out. And I think this is a direct correlation to what we see currently in Riftbound. The region doesn't have the same kind of experience when it comes to card games overall, so they didn't evolve. They just stayed in this set way and didn't try to move the needle too much, because also, why play something else that is not proven to be strong when you can just play something that is strong currently, like the Kai'Sa, like the Master Yi, right? And just focus on playing that. Also remember that the Chinese region has less time to evolve because they already will have the next expansion. So Spirit Forge is already out in China. But what's very interesting, I'm very anxiously waiting for the moment when both NA, Europe and China are gonna align when it comes to the release of the Riftbound tournaments in the future, which is gonna happen, if I'm not mistaken, with the 4th expansion. All right, now we're gonna be talking about a very important topic, which is the Day 2 format, which I think is not great. By not great, I mean it's actually sucks really bad. So I was certain that the entire Day 2 will be played like in auto card games, where you play Swiss, like 9 rounds of Swiss on day 1, and then you play 3 rounds of Swiss on day 2, and then you cut to top 8. Unfortunately, that was not the reality for our tournament here in Houston, where the Day 2 was top 64 single elimination bracket. I feel like some of the League of Legends formats are leaking into our world here, and I don't like it. Some PTSD from League of Legends here. Anyway, the point is, I don't think this is very indicative also of how the metagame should actually be played out, because single elim bracket not only limits the amount of interactions between the decks, because if I'm not mistaken, the top 64 seeds were not exactly randomized, but if you lose, you're out. Right, so someone who went, for example, 9-0 in day 1 could be knocked out against a person who was 7-2 and was like coming in from the 64th place. That is not very indicative, because with the 3 additional Swiss rounds, that person at 9-0 would definitely not be knocked out in the 10th round, right? And that's basically how it would work with this single elimination bracket. And I think this format, unfortunately, kind of corroded the top 8, because potentially this could have been very different if a Swiss format would have been still the thing for day 2. So also, there's very different potentially damaging aspects of single elimination. First, the players being kicked out of round 1 on day 2 without additional pricing, essentially, which would also not happen basically with Swiss, because you would have chances to perform better over time and not just being one and done, which happened to many good players in the top 64, which sucks, and I feel for them. Also remember, the best performing player here still gets the metal foiling card. So if you were in one of the most popular legends, you actually had the chances of getting that card being more RNG, because it's all like one and done, and you lose. You could have been the best performing Kai'Sa, for example, at 9-0, but you lost the round 10, which is the top 64, and you're out. And another Kai'Sa who was performing worse on day 1 suddenly comes over you just because he performs better in the single elim bracket instead of the Swiss. I think this is a problem. And then there's another aspect that I think I don't like personally very much, and I'm talking here about intentional draws. That's a separate video overall, but I wanted to just say how the single elim affects that. So when people know that on day 2 they're going to be playing a single elimination top 64 bracket, they will literally take draws on day 1, because there's zero incentive to play the last 1 or 2 rounds in the day 1 if they have like 7-0, because there's no reason to perform better. They're gonna still play one match and done on the day 2, so why bother? Your placements will not matter that much, right? And I think that's a big problem, because if we would have additional 3 Swiss rounds on day 2, then the players from day 1, most of them would actually not take the IDs and would try to play, because they would want to have a better score in day 1 to have a better chance at advancing to top 8 during the next 3 rounds of Swiss on day 2. And I think overall, when people choose not to play the game because that's mathematically better than playing the game, shows a flaw in the design of the format. And I think that's a problem that has to be, my opinion, solved in the future. So for the future regionals, and I hope this is going to be changed for Bologna as well, which, you know, I will try to get the ticket for, I don't want to see the single elimination bracket for day 2, and I hope we're gonna get just more Swiss rounds, because that's more fair for everyone involved. Alright, now let's talk about the top 8 deck lists. First, note, every single deck list in the top 8 is worth minimum $500. But at the same time, if you would check those prices before the regional in Houston, all of the any decks would have been way lower. There was a huge surge in price on TCG Player straight up after Houston, which is some, you know, understandable, I would say, but it is getting a little bit unhealthy, let me tell you that. And by the way, I wanted to also say that coming in from the top 64 single Elim bracket, there was also a very funny bracket in the top 8 where every single Annie was on a different branch, which means in theory that we could have ended up with 4 Annies in the top 4. We ended up with 3 of them and 1 Master Yi, right? But it is crazy that this is pure luck, essentially, right? This outcome here, because it comes directly from the single Elim bracket. So again, this could have been looking very different if we were playing Swiss tournament in day 2 as well. So this is the winners deck list played by Dawali. I hope I say that right. We have him playing the Annie, a third champion. Congrats to the performance, fantastic. You know, just great, just fucking phenomenal, right? For winning the first big event, you're gonna be in the history of Riftbound now, engraved in the North American region. But let's talk about his deck. Like, just look at the price of the flashes. $51 for a 1 flash. They were $20 just before Houston, so you can see why the decks rose in price. Also, the character itself is $33. Now they're gonna get a reprint in the Nexus packs coming with Spirit Forge, so in February there's gonna be more options to play Annie, because they're gonna get essentially a reprint there. But remember, you can still buy the Chinese Annies and get them from China for cheaper, essentially. Unfortunately, well, flashes, if you don't want to play an entire Chinese deck, then you have to buy them for this price. So yeah, a little bit of a yikes over here. But overall, the deck list, I'll be very honest with you, this is pretty standard for current Annies, right? There was a little bit of an evolution with the scrap heap being involved in the decks, but that's for quite some time now, so it's not really surprising. And I like the deck. It's very consistent. As you can see, all the units are 3 times off, so you know what you're drawing, right? You have the Kaisas, you have the Dariuses being the top end, which are fantastic when it comes to like the not top end, but like mid, you know what I mean. They're just great units. And the Vi, of course, is the bread and butter of this deck, which is the finishing move. I really like the theory behind the deck. What I also like is the inclusion of 1 Rebuke in the main, which is important. Overall, this is probably the most important card in the deck itself when you have to face a lot of Aurora decks, right? So we have 2 in the sideboard, and that's essentially it. Those are like the most important stuff. Otherwise, you're gonna have very standard deck with the Arena Greatest, Dreaming Tree, and Zone Warrens all fitting into the way that you want to play this deck. Like, all of them do what you want them to do. They are not neutrals. They are just decks that are sorry, they are just battlefields that make you play better. This is a very fast deck, so getting more points is something that you want to do. Dreaming Tree allows you to dig for the combo for the Vi and Ride the Wind, right? So you get more chances to get into that point. The same goes for Zone Warrens, but also Zone Warrens has the synergy of discarding cards to Vi to get more destruct. Nice one, right? Anyway, the point is, this is a very straightforward deck in its design, and I very much like it. And we're not going to see many variations over the course of the other top 8 decks, but again, congrats to Diwali, fantastic performance, and big congrats. Second place is Challenger TCG, who also has a YouTube channel, if I'm not mistaken, so check that out. Has been finishing on the second place with the most expensive deck in the top 8. I know this doesn't matter, but it's just funny to say. So it's more of a, I think, more standard Master Yi that doesn't have many surprising things, apart from the fact that it plays 2 disciplines instead of 3, right? And you typically will see 3 disciplines here. And also the sideboard is filled with units that are essentially changing the way that you play from Aurora to being a little bit more early game based, with the inclusion of Clockwork Keepers and Stalwart Poros, and a little bit more counter-active, proactive to some degree sabotages, because you already have one in the main deck, and additional Wind Wall to be reactive as well, so you can attack those both directions over here. So pretty straightforward deck, not much to say here. Again, congrats to Challenger TCG. Is he the same person that also won the 10k with the set? I think so, no? Anyway, let me in the comment if I'm correct or not. Unfortunately, I cannot find the third place Annie that ended up there, so I don't know what was in it. Unfortunately, I couldn't find it on any website. So we're gonna be talking about Primal here on the 4th place, which is a little bit different from the first place Annie. As you can see, there's a little bit less consistency in the units, but not by much. Like there's 1 Legion Rearguard and 2 Pouty Porous instead of just having 3 for 3 of everything, right? Both of those decks, by the way, these Annies here from the 1st and the 4th place don't play a Falling Star in the main. And in case of, if I remember correctly, of Diwali, I don't think he plays Falling Star at all. Yeah, he doesn't play Falling Star at all, because in the sideboard we have 2 Dravens, which are meant, to just kind of beef up your board against Kaisers, for example, which have a hard time dealing with units that potentially have like 7, 8, 9 health. And it's very easy for Annie to get to that point because she scores points very easily as well, right? So then, other than that, also 1 Rebuke main. It is the same combination of locations, also the Scrap Heap version. So otherwise, it's a very similar deck, but it has, instead of 2 Ravens, has Noxus Hopefuls, just for that more explosive opens that are possible with Noxus's Hopeful, because they're just cheaper than Dravens, and they deliver potentially just a, lower value overall in the end game. Now on the 6th place we have Clyde, who is also playing a Master Yi, but is not your typical Master Yi with Auroras. It's an Aurora in the sideboard, where you can see that he is just possibly just swapping completely the way that for sure he's swapping his playstyle from a more mid-rangey version into a almost fully Aurora version, when he can incite in a Volibear, 2 Dazzling Auroras, but also has 2 Mobilize, 2 Ramp, and in general has more possibility of answering big creatures. So depending on the matchups that he will have, he will be playing one of those 2 versions of the deck. I like the flexibility, although the consistency might be hurt a little bit by that, but at the same time, I'm not an expert on this deck, so maybe the reality is actually different. But it's a nice approach to how you can build a Yi over here, and it's just a cool, very solid deck overall. From my Polish brethren Alan, who you can find on Twitter over there on the top, Alanzq this is the most likely 99% accurate list that he played in Houston. To my knowledge, he changed 1 Thermo Beam in the sideboard for the unchecked power. Everything else should be the same. So essentially this list is almost like a standard Kai'Sa, but not exactly. I played this list myself. I think I'm a little bit too stupid for now to play this version, because it's a little bit more complicated. You can see, for example, in the battlefields, there's no Dreaming Tree. And when I spoke with Alan, he told me that the way he perceives it is that the Dreaming Tree allows you to lower the skill ceiling of the game, because you just get more cards, but you also give the ability to your opponents to draw more cards. So when you believe that you're a better player, which Alan for sure should, then you can play without the Dreaming Tree. So he plays with Reaver's Row, Arena's Greatest, and the Candlelight Sanctum to be a little bit more neutral on that location. He also starts, to my knowledge, in most cases with the Reaver's Row as the first location. Other than that, the deck has no Yordles in the main, which makes sense because you want to have 9 2-drops to guarantee still can happen to not have a 2-drop in the opening, which we did see on stream happen to Alan, unfortunately. But other than that, the deck is incredibly consistent because you have 3 of almost everything apart from Time Warp, which is a one-off, and Retreat is in 2 pieces, right? You have 3 Void Seekers to be better a little bit in mirrors to when it comes to consistently killing an opponent. Kai'Sa on the battlefield, that's one of the options. You have the 3 smoke screens because they are giving you a lot of options in almost every single matchup, maybe apart from Victor, for example, when this smoke screen doesn't really come in handy that much. But other than that, you have the tools to play against every single thing that you will meet. Now, I personally I'm thinking of swapping the Icathian Rain to main because I feel like I'm missing it. I kind of like, for me as a worse quality player, I feel like I need to have that crutch inside of the deck to just, when I'm falling behind because I'm playing badly, I want to reset the board of the Icathian Rain. But overall, I'm really liking this direction of the Kai'Sa, and I will be definitely practicing more myself. Now, next place on 7th place is George, the player that went to the Chinese region and played a lot of tournaments there, made a name for himself. And he's also playing Kai'Sa with a little bit of a different approach. There's less 2-drops, for example. There's only 8, 1 Legionary Rearguard and 1 Pauti Poro, which gives you a little bit more flexibility in what you want to do with this 2-drop essentially. But Pauti Poros are better in mirror matches, right? Has 2 Kai'Sa survivors. That's one of the things that most people are actually shying away from. Other than that, we have all of this stuff is played exactly the same, but 1 smoke screen, 1 Icathian Rain, 1 Time Warp, but the locations are more standard. We have the Dreaming Tree, we have Targon's Peak, but Vilmo's Lair. And that is interesting. I'm not certain exactly in which matchups should be this coming in, as maybe even use open with this Vilmo Lair, or you playing this when you're playing in a mirror and you want to play around a reverse row from the opponents and kind of force him to fight for your location. It's kind of weird. Like I'm not gonna lie, I didn't think about like analyzing this one particular location over here, but it's an interesting choice. In the sideboard, we only see 1 Thermo Beam, by the way, which is peculiar because in a world where with so many Auroras are a thing, the 1 Thermo Beam doesn't really seem to be that, you know, good. It's like maybe you just should play 0 at this point. But there's also Brain here, which is great against mirrors, I guess. But at the same time, how often this will come up? And there's 1 Tryndamere. When I need to read the card again. When I concur after an attack, if you assign 5 or more excess damage to enemy units, you score 1 point. So this doesn't probably come against mirrors, because how often you actually defeat a unit on a battlefield with this in a mirror when you want to like go more back and forth, not certain. But yeah, anyway, cool list. Now the next list is Buta EJG, who played Annie, finished at the 8th place. It's a little bit different, but more of the same. So essentially, there's some difference, like instead of a 3rd Darius, there's 1 Vayne, which is a little bit earlier coming into the game and can help you against other aggressive decks, right? Or speed up the process of getting points if your opponent is playing, like, for example, a Yi mid-range, which actually takes space on battlefields. I'm a big fan of Vayne personally. I had her in my own Kai'Sas and sideboards, but they got fact-checked pretty fast when they, you know, the 2 HP is not great. Like, you benefit when you have reverse row. You benefit if you actually bounce it, but how often you will play this? Yeah, that doesn't come that often. Other than that, not much here. The standard locations. Other than that, we have 1 Falling Star in the main, other 1 in the sideboard, 1 Rebuke in the main, but only 1 in the sideboard. And there's another Darius Trifarian in the sideboard to beef up your board in matchups when you need more units. So that's essentially it. But other than that, it's like all standard. Like, you don't really have, I feel like Annie might be one of the most perfected lists in the game, because there's not much better that you can get in those slots, you know? So in Kai'Sas, for example, in Master Yi's, in Misfortunes, there's gonna be a little bit more not improvisation, but like own play style involved. While with Annie, I feel like there's really a direction that you have to be with to be efficient with this deck. And the last place here is No Veggies with Annie, who is, I just realized, exactly the same deck as from Buddha, but Buddha has the mistake here on this website, on Rift decks, where he has one Pauti power instead of 2 and is lacking 1 card in the deck. So that's essentially it. So the decks are the same apart from the difference in runes. It's 5 and 7 towards red instead of 6 and 6. So that's a personal choice, but it seems like those are teammates, or at least test partners, who played exactly the same deck. So very, very fucking nice. Congrats on the top 8, big achievement, and then made names for themselves for sure right now. And the last topic for the video is actually going to be a shorter one. I just want to talk about it a little bit, and then I'm going to do a separate video with an analysis of that particular game where Alan did not get the point from the arena's greatest. Now, I think this should not be that way. Like, let me just be clear. I think this should be a mandatory trigger that has to be added, and has to be both players paying attention to this stuff, you know? So like, this should never be a trigger that you can miss. That's my opinion, and this has to be changed, and hopefully it will be changed. But it sucks that you play such a big event and you got to top 8 and you missed that like simple thing that should not be even in the first place in the rules, at least in my book. So I feel very sorry for Alan, but big up for him for not wanting to add that point and standing on his principles, because if I'm not mistaken, again, a little bit of rumors and unconfirmed stuff, but I heard that the other player that he was playing against wanted to give him that point, and Alan said no because he missed the trigger. Now, you can argue if this is, you know, impressive or maybe stupidity to some degree, but maybe Alan's just making a point and wants to, for the better, you know, betterment of the game, force Riot to change those rules, hopefully. Anyway, kinda sucks. I will analyze this match to see how big of an impact was actually not getting that 1 point while the opponent was getting that 1 point, and see how it impacted the decision making in that game. But overall, in my opinion, this should be changed. All right, that's gonna be it for this first regional recap. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed the video, let me know in the comments. I would like to hear what was I missing in this video. What would you like to hear more about? Because I would like to do every single big tournament. I would like to do like a recap like this, and if there's anything you were missing, let me know. If you would like to see more videos like this, also let me know. And if you're a dude, if you watch the entire video, I salute you. And yeah, leave a comment like, I watched the entire video, dude. Bye bye, see ya.